Hello and welcome to episode 41 of the Ego Chall Podcast, a Call of Duty esports podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we will be discussing the final week of the CDL qualifying matches before the second major. And then we also will be previewing the second major for the Call of Duty League season. We have a lot to cover today. We're going to try to do a little bit different format for this episode compared to what we did for a preview of the first major, just because there's so much to cover and so little time. But before we do any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm doing well. Ready to hop right in.
Yeah, so I think the last time that we did the major preview, we obviously had a week in between matches, which helped us a lot, but we still had like an hour and 20, hour and 30-minute episode for that preview episode. But so we're going to try to do things a little bit differently. Today we're going to kind of go team by team and kind of run through kind of how their stage went or how their qualifying matches went and what our thoughts are on that team heading into the second major. So we'll start at the bottom of the standings, and this is a pretty surprising team to be at the very bottom of the standings considering how they did in the first stage. But in 12th place is the Los Angeles Thieves. They went 0-5 in their qualifying matches with a 7-15 map count. They are now one of only two teams this season that have went 0-5 in qualifying matches after the Paris Legion did the same in the first set of qualifying matches before Major 1. Like I said, the Thieves, they were 4-1 in the last set of qualifying matches, which was, I believe, third place. They were, technically tied for second, but with a tiebreaker, I think they ended up in third place in the major, and they were even a map away from eliminating FaZe from the first major. They actually were reverse swept in the losers bracket finals or loser bracket semifinals maybe, but they were also a map away from sending the Toronto Ultra to the losers bracket in that same tournament. So it's a very surprising team to be in 12th place. But there are a lot of reasons why they are, and the first and foremost is that they just are probably the most inconsistent team this year, or in this stage, excuse me. And they lost both of their matches this past week. They lost to the Los Angeles Guerrillas on Friday and then lost to the Seattle Surge on Saturday. I'll let you take it away, Bink, because I'm already tired of myself talking, but what did you think of their performances against LAG and Seattle this week to finish off what is a catastrophic failure of a stage?
Yeah, I was expecting the Thieves to bounce back. We had heard Kenny and I think maybe JCAF tweeted it. I can't really remember who else, but tweets about like inconsistencies and like bad practice. I can't remember the exact words they used, but we had heard about situations like that happening in the past weeks, and heading into this final week of qualifiers with still a small chance of making the winners bracket for the major. They were 0-3. If they win both these matches, they could be 2-3 and get in with like tiebreakers or something. I was expecting them to, really, put their heads down, grind, try to figure out what's going wrong, and bounce back against two teams that should have been winnable matches for them. It's not like they played OpTic and FaZe. They played LAG and Seattle, who have each had their own inconsistencies this year. So I thought it was a good chance for the Thieves to bounce back, but obviously that's not what happened. Now they're sitting at 0-5, and technically they are the last place team heading into this major, which means they would. Actually, no, I don't think that matters for the bracket breakdown, but regardless, they're just starting this major right away in the losers bracket, which is something that a lot of people wouldn't really expect. And I'm not exactly sure where the Thieves go from here, but obviously, for a roster with this much talent on it, just 0-5 is just not going to cut it. And we've seen the Thieves make roster changes in the past, so if they get first rounded at this major, I wouldn't be surprised to see something happen. But it comes down to who exactly they would change I don't really know if it's a one-person change. I don't know who that one person would even be if they do make just a single-person change. It's a weird situation because they do have a lot of talent and they've shown flashes of brilliance. Like, just before this last set of online qualifiers, at least I was considering them a top 4 team, potentially top 3, and one of the best hardpoint teams in the game. And uh, just basically done a full 180 from there. So, not really sure what they do from here, but the pressure's on at this major. Already starting in that loser bracket, they have to come out and perform in that first match right away. And we can talk about the bracket later, but they will play the loser of New York versus Atlanta, which, if that match goes the way most people would expect with Atlanta winning, that would be a rematch of the losers bracket match from the first major where the Thieves played New York, with New York starting in the major, and New York got instantly eliminated. So New York could have a shot at revenge against the Thieves, not being in the best form, but getting a little ahead of ourselves right there. I just think, based on what we saw this last week and the last couple of weeks in the qualifiers, it's been a major slump for the Thieves.
Yeah, and like you said, there could be changes on the horizon. We don't know, but when a team goes 0-5, we saw it with the Paris Legion. They didn't even wait to make changes until after the major. They put in Gravity, and I think they had already planned to put in Jimbo before the last major. And so Paris made those changes, and I don't know how much of a difference. Obviously, Paris did win, and they were win a match in this stage, and they were close to winning several more had they not been reverse swept a few times. But for the Thieves, we talked about it before the season that this roster on paper was incredible because of the amount of talent that it had. And just things haven't clicked just in the past month or so, because it wasn't a problem before the major, seemingly. Like I said, they were like the third best team or the fourth best team. They were in I think both of our minds, they were like a top 4, top 5 team in the league going into the last major, and they nearly eliminated FaZe. Even if FaZe looked kind of vulnerable and not as dominant as we expected them to, I still think that's something to kind of think about, is that they were very close to making the grand finals realistically for that last major. Things have just kind of gone off the rails here in the past month or so. And I actually saw this video, and this was just a video of clips of Nade Shot during one of his recent streams, and he was I think people in his chat were talking about whether the Thieves would replace JCap, who is the head coach of the LA Thieves, and replace Mud Dog, who I believe is like the general manager of the team, and has been with the 100 Thieves organization for several years, and it was actually part of he constructed the original I mean not the original, but like the original good 100 Thieves roster, that Black Ops 4 roster that was Slasher and Priesta and Octane, etc., that ended up finishing second at the I believe that was 2017, 2018 COD Champs, 2018, I believe, because 2017 was World War II, 2018, I think, was Black Ops 4. But either way, Black Ops 4 COD Champs, they got second. And Nate Chat was commenting on it, whether they were going to replace JCap and Mud Dog. And he basically said that people that were calling for JCap and Mud Dog's heads, figuratively, were kind of insane, and that it wasn't going to happen because, I won't quote him, I'll paraphrase, but he was basically saying that JCap is a very smart player from when he was a player, and obviously Nade Shot played with him, played against him. He has a lot of experience, presumably like behind the scenes with JCap, and JCap has been a part of the Thieves organization for a little bit now. And the same with Mud Dog. He commended him on the Black Ops 4 roster and everything. And he did admit that they do need work in Search and Destroy, and that he was or the organization rather, was exploring options to add a search and destroy coach to help them in that game mode. And he also mentioned Parasite because people have been kind of vouching for Parasite since he retired from competing, and he's been looking for I think more like a full-time job in Call of Duty esports, and people have been suggesting him as a possible coaching replacement or just maybe an addition to the coaching staff for the LA Thieves, and he seemed pretty hesitant to do that based on Parasite's reputation as a player. Maybe a lot of that has changed. I don't really know, but his reputation was that he was incredibly toxic and hard to work with, and that seemed to be Nadeshot's thoughts on him, or it didn't seem like much had changed in his mind. So I think that was a very interesting little bit of his stream. I don't know if you had the chance to watch it, but it was like I I feel I would never call for a coach or a GM's head. Like I'll do that in traditional sports because they get paid millions of dollars, and like that's that's a completely different thing. But for like JCap and Mud Dog, I know that they don't get paid millions of dollars, and like they're mostly like the people that are coaches and GMs of these Call of Duty rosters are former players and people just trying to make their own way in this scene. So I won't call for their heads, but do you think that a coaching change is really what is like the difference between like, an 0-5 LA Thieves roster and maybe a good LA Thieves roster in stage 3? Do you think a coaching change has that much impact on a team?
No, I mean, unless there's like drama behind the scenes, which I did watch the video, and Nate Shot kind of alluded to it towards the end where he said that, like, if all four players came to him or Mud Dog and was like, hey, look, like things aren't working with JCap, we need to move on or something, then they would consider a change. He didn't say that was happening, that was hypothetical, but barring something like that happening, or there's like just some drama and stuff behind the scenes we don't know about, I don't think a coaching change is like, gonna miraculously change things for the Thieves here, unless I don't know. I don't know much about JCap as a coach just because he hasn't been doing it that long, really. But I feel like the upper tier of coaches right now, you got to say it's like Crowder and Rambo. So unless like you somehow are able to get one of them, like I don't know exactly what coaching change could be made. That's a huge upgrade. I've always, kind of like Nate was saying in the video, I think Jacob's a really smart player, so it makes sense that he has the potential to be a smart coach. And I did like how he mentioned the potential to bring on, an S&D coach or analyst or something like that to try to help. Um, I don't know exactly who they would bring on in that capacity. Because like Tupac is with with Bays, sorry. Um, Equip is with Seattle. Um, maybe I mean Teddy was formerly with Seattle as an S&D coach. Maybe he's someone they could target, but regardless, I think that would be more beneficial to them, especially with their struggles in S&D when they were performing well. Kind of right now, like they need to work on everything. So I don't think an S&D coach is the immediate answer either. But like if they were in their previous like stage one, I don't want to say stage, but whatever. If they were in the past form that we saw in the last group of matches and major, where they were like dominating in hardpoint and only struggling in S&D, then I think an S&D coach is like a great move they can make. I think it's a great move regardless, but then it makes more sense then as opposed to now where they're just like struggling all around. So I thought that was an interesting video. Um, one thing I'll say about Nade Shot is he really appears to care a great deal about the results of all of his teams across all of the esports that 100 Thieves and LA Thieves compete in. Um, so it's good transparency to see from him, um, exactly what he's thinking and stuff like that. So, yeah, I don't, end of the day, I don't think getting rid of JCap or Mudcap. Wow, I almost said Mudkip. I think JCap or Mud Dog getting rid of them, I don't think that fixes anything immediately. But again, I think we'll have to see how they perform at this major and see what they do from there.
Yeah, I agree with you. I excuse me. I don't think that a coaching change in Call of Duty is as consequential as a coaching change in many other traditional sports. I would liken it more to like NBA. The NBA is notoriously like coaches can be fired at any given moment, and it's usually down to the star players. And the players are more, they take more of a lead in most. I don't want to say most, but in some teams, like with LeBron James's teams or whatever, like those coaches are more figureheads or kind of advisors in a sense because the players kind of run the ship. And I do think that in Call of Duty, because coaches for a long time were really not a thing other than like hype men, like Mr. X or other people that just didn't offer as much to their teams and their team's performance as they do now, because there are millions and millions of dollars invested into the scene. So, Atlanta FaZe obviously is going to have a big coaching staff and an analytics staff because they invested millions of dollars into this team and they want to get some of their investment out of it. I believe LA Thieves are the same way. That like you said, Nate Shot seems very hands-on and very, like he has a actual vested interest in his team's success, which is nice to see. And it definitely helps fans rally around the team when the team owner and, whatever the CEO or whatever, he's like Mark Cuban. He's standing on the sidelines cheering on his team, like he wants them to win, and it feels like he's just a fan that just so happens to own the team. So I do think that the coaching change is not the biggest thing, and I don't think that it's right for people to go on social media and say like, fire JCap, fire Mud Dog, like they're the reason we're losing. It's like, well, JCap's not in any of these gunfights. Like he's not losing 15 of 22 maps this stage. Like that's kind of on the players for the most part, and I think even the players would admit that. I don't think that they would scapegoat JCap and say, well, he's the reason that we're losing these maps for the most part. So maybe a coaching change would help, but I don't think that it's a primary concern for them in the slightest at the moment. I think that they kind of need to figure this out, and I do think that they could salvage this without a roster change, but I don't
Definitely.
know if they will, because LA Thieves, they were very ready to make roster changes last year, so maybe they'll be the same this year if things just don't like right this ship. Um, do you have any other thoughts on the Thieves before we move on to the Toronto Ultra?
Nah, I think just get chugging on this.
All right, Toronto. They finish in 11th, so another surprising result for the stage or whatever of qualifying matches. The Ultra, they finish these 5 qualifying matches with a 1-4 record, a pretty decent 10-13 map score, which kind of indicates how, maybe if they won a hard point every now and then, they probably would have picked up a few more series. They are one of the worst hardpoint teams in the entire league at the moment. They've won a few, but not many, and it's really been their Achilles heel for pretty much this entire, or maybe not this entire season, but basically since the first major, where they were just kind of winning despite not winning any hard points. They lost to Paris on this past Friday, 3-2, didn't win the hard points. And then they lost to New York, who we had mentioned on the last podcast that New York hadn't been a very good hard point team. And we really hadn't seen enough with Paul X to make a decision on whether they had become a good hard point team. But Toronto, they lost both hard points again. They lose 3-1 to the Subliners, and that's their 4th loss, and it ensures that they are the 11th seed going into this major, which also ensures that they start in the losers bracket. Any thoughts on Toronto as they head into this major, starting in the losers bracket?
Yeah, I mean that's super surprising. Again, like we have the Thieves in 12th place. We just spent a pretty good chunk of time talking about. They came, top 6 at the last major, and Toronto right behind them now in 11th. They came in 4th at that major, and again, like you just talked about, they came in 4th despite not winning a hard point at that tournament, and that's been a big focus of a lot of people. Something people in the community and myself have been keeping an eye on throughout these qualifying matches is would they improve in hard point? And if I remember correctly, I think Toronto's first match of these qualifying matches. Yeah, so their first match of the qualifying matches was against Minnesota. They won both hard points and they win that series 3-1. But that was, I was kind of like pump the brakes. Like it's cool, Toronto wins both hard points, but Minnesota isn't exactly a hard point powerhouse. So and we need to see if this is like more of a Minnesota thing or if Toronto is actually improved. And as we've seen since that match, they're on a 4-series losing streak, and they're losing. Did they lose both hard points to Paris? I can't even remember.
I
Pretty
believe
sure
so.
they did. They sure did. I mean, 250, 231, 250, 248. So they were close. But again, Paris isn't, exactly a hard point powerhouse either. And then they lose both hard points again to New York, especially Berlin. Hard point 250 to 113 was kind of noticeable. And that's a team, made a fresh roster change, and they weren't doing well at all in hard point before this. So, that's a really concerning situation in Toronto right now. I don't know. Again, kind of similar to the Thieves. I don't know exactly what the answer is. Just, this is a team that was the second best team in the league last year. They have so much talent too. Um, and I don't know where they go from here, but we're going to have to see something from them as well at this major if, they want to stick together as a team, because if they continue to just absolutely struggle in hard point and they drop out of this major with a last place finish, I'm not exactly sure if we see the same exact Toronto roster compete in the Major 3 qualifiers. But that's also a little bit of a tricky situation because they have Hixie as a sub, and I'm not sure if just bringing him in is like a huge um, upgrade or a huge just fix.
Hmm.
And at the same time, Toronto has clearly kind of shifted towards a European roster construction. So I don't know too much about the European amateur scene, but you would assume that they would potentially, if they want to make a roster change and it doesn't involve Hixie, that they would look there to make a change. So a lot of variables there with Toronto. I think that's we just got to keep an eye on their hard point because they have, they're winning searches, and um, that's obviously a very important mode. But if you can't win the hard points, um, and even if you win the search, if you can't win just one respawn, then you can't even get to a second search. So they're in a tough situation, and just like with these, we're gonna have to see how they respond at this major and what they're able to do.
I know that a few of their players have talked about how COVID has kind of hit the team, and that's kind of changed how they're able to practice and play and whatnot. Ban said it sucks, man. Started improving in hardpoint massively after Major 1, which was seen against Minnesota, and then back-to-back COVID. For us, just put us so much further back. I don't know what to say anymore. And that was on March 27th, so that was a few days ago. So I think that is part of it. I just don't know. Like I think if they all believe that the COVID reasons are uh, a driving force behind why they can't seem to win hard points. And I mean, hard point is a team game. You can't just like we've seen individual players have really good performances in hardpoint, but it does take a team effort to win at this level in that game mode. So I could see how bad practice, as we've seen with the 100 Thieves, that or with LA Thieves, excuse me, that they're struggling with a lot of game modes actually. But I think that if this is a major issue for them, then they probably will stick together after this, after the major. And I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind, though, is that there is so much time between the end of the second major and the beginning of qualifiers for the third major. There's more than a month difference. So I do think that teams could make they might decide after the second major, okay, we're not going to make a change, but maybe they continue to practice for another 2 to 3 weeks and they're like, all right, things are not getting better for us. Maybe we should make a change before we actually start these qualifying matches, which it could happen for Toronto. I'm not really sure, but I think that it's something to note about the COVID issues and what the players are currently saying about their current state of play. Let's move on to the Paris Legion, because Paris is a really weird team in general. Usually, they've had a lot of close matches in the qualifying matches this time around. They still finished in 10th place with a 1-4 record and an 8-14 map count. But they did finish the stage off with a win over Toronto. They beat them 3-2 on Friday. We just talked about it, how Toronto hasn't been able to win hard points. And the Paris Legion have been all right in hardpoint, I think. Like, they've taken a few, including that bonkers one against Minnesota a few weeks back. I mean, is Paris winning champs at this point, or is it too early? Like, are they scaling and they're just going to get there at some point in the season?
They might be scaling. I think this is in a more serious note. I think they aren't in the same boat as Toronto and LA Thieves in my mind. Like, not a lot of people expect this Paris team to be contending for titles right now. So seeing them start in the loser bracket necessarily isn't really a surprise. For me, I think they have, they're in a situation here with the bracket coming up where they would play the loser of London, Florida, which, I I don't really know who takes that series. I guess London is favored, and then you would potentially see Florida versus Paris, and you would probably favor Florida in that. But regardless, this is more a situation here where I feel like a little bit of the spotlight has to be on Jimbo, just because this will be his first time on land in the CDL, and that there was the talks and stuff on social media about his performance in the online matches. Like, Paris is starting in the losers bracket. He technically could only have one shot to prove himself in a land environment, one match. He's got to go out and take advantage of the situation, and try and change the mind of some of the doubters. So, in my mind, that's what I'm looking at for Paris here. Like, they could very well have another disappointing performance at the major, or we could see another full team interview after a win in the first round of the losers bracket again, like we saw in Texas. But yeah, for Paris, I think they still sense bringing gravity in, and they've looked a little better. I think Jimbo, I don't have his numbers in front of me right now, but I feel like he's performed a little better individually since people were calling him out and stuff. So not that that's correlated or anything, but I feel like maybe nerves or maybe lag, a whole bunch of variables could be involved in his initial performance. But that's all in the past now. It doesn't matter. He's got a shot here on land to come out and show what he can do. So regardless of how Paris performs at the major, that's what I'm going to be looking at to see. Temp played really well at the first land, so will be interesting to see if he picks up where he left off in that regard. And then my eyes are going to be on Jimbo to see what he's able to do on land.
Jimbo actually had his best series to date with Paris against Toronto. He had a 1.04 overall KD, 0.99 in hard point, a 1.05 in S&D, and a 1.82 in S&D. So that was definitely his highest. And then a 0.83 KD in control. I mean, obviously, like, your stats are probably going to be higher when you win matches, because that's just kind of how it goes a lot of times. But I do think that Minnesota series is kind of, like, it's dragged down his stats, like, in numbers wise, and I think that people just focused on that match in particular, and kind of I don't want to say like people are trying to push the narrative, but I don't think that people are going to give him as big of a chance because there is that one series where he did really, really badly. So I hope that he does well. This is a big opportunity for him, just as it is a big opportunity. It was a big opportunity for Gravity when he came in before the major last time, and he had the chance to prove himself. And maybe Paris can pull off another upset. It'll be an interesting thing to watch. They don't. I think that they would rather have Florida come down to the losers bracket instead of London, and I think that is probably the more likely option. But they're gonna have to beat a lot of good teams the rest of the way anyway for the entire season. So you might as well just if London goes down there, you gotta try to beat them and get some momentum heading in to the mid-season break. Let's move on to the hosts of this upcoming major, the Minnesota Rocker. They are currently in ninth place heading into this major, which makes them the unlucky team that they were actually tied with Florida and Seattle going into the major, but because of the tiebreakers, they finished ninth, while Florida finished seventh and Seattle finished eighth, putting the Rocker in the losers bracket of their own tournament, which is not a place that you really want to be. You kind of want to have at least a few chances to play on land in front of your hometown fans, but they will start in the losers bracket because they went 2-3 and had an 8-13 map record. This team's a weird one. I think that they've looked pretty mediocre is probably the right word. Not bad, but certainly not as good as you would imagine. They could be. I think there have been some role changes with attach and everything. So they've tried a few different things, but I do think that there is a possibility that this could be the last time we see this iteration of the roster together if they are knocked out in the first round. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I don't know. It's definitely like you said. It's a weird one because they have so much potential. Especially we
Yeah.
saw it at the end of the Cold War season. So um, it is somewhat unfortunate too for their sake that they're starting in the losers bracket at their own major. I mean, first before we even say that, technically, if um we had the preseason originally planned format, there would be the potential for Minnesota to not even compete at their own major because only 8 teams were initially scheduled to perform or to compete at each land. So, but I mean, so at least they have a chance to start in the loser bracket at their own major. But the Minnesota crowd we saw at the what was it? It wasn't called the kickoff, I don't think. Whatever the inaugural event of
It was the launch
Modern
weekend.
Warfare launch weekend. That's what it was called. Thank you. And we saw what the Minnesota crowd could bring. They were getting super hyped for their team, pre-COVID and all that. So, from that perspective, it's a little, it's definitely disappointing for them that they potentially only get to play one match at their home event, but we've seen them make losers bracket runs and incredible comebacks and reverse sweeps multiple times with this 4-man roster. So I wouldn't be surprised if they somehow found a way to pull off some hometown magic here this upcoming weekend. But it is going to be a tough task for them, regardless of who they end up playing in their opening losers bracket match.
Uh, this is an interesting trend, I guess, with Minnesota. Maybe not that interesting if you're a fan of Minnesota, but they have not won two straight or lost two straight in like a month and a half because they lost to Phase 03, then they beat LAG, then they lost to LAT, beat LAG, lost to Toronto, beat Paris, lost to Boston, beat LAT, and then lost to New York. So they are coming off of a loss. So the loser of OpTic in Seattle should be pretty scared going up against Minnesota in front of their home crowd, and they just seem to be on some like even game BS right now. So maybe Minnesota is due for one. I'm not too confident. They're a really poor hardpoint team at the moment. They're like 5-15 this season in that game mode. They're decent in search, so that could be an advantage. But they just aren't. They're not clicking right now. Even though Attach is putting up some like big numbers at times, and Standy does as well, mostly in search and destroy. But it just doesn't seem like they're able to find what they had at the end of last season, which was honestly just they clicked right at the right time. The end of the season is the perfect time, but I don't think that they can just wait around and hope that it'll happen again. I do think that time is running out for this roster, especially if they get beat by like Seattle, and I definitely think they'll get beat if OpTic goes down to the losers bracket. So
I just think similar to the Thieves in Toronto, unless there's just some like crazy, wild, multi-team roster mania, like I really don't see a one-person change solving this for Minnesota. I don't even know if they really would make a change because I feel like Attach, Standy, and Priester are almost untouchable, so it would be almost like Major Maniac would be the odd man out, but I don't
yeah.
know if replacing him is really the solution. And obviously, I think Major Maniac's a great player. He's super good at S&D, good leader, good comms. So I don't, again, this is a weird situation where we're looking at these bottom teams, except for Paris, who has actually made changes. We're looking at these teams, and at least me, I don't really see, what kind of change, if they decide to make it, would solve things for them. But um, similar to those other teams we've been talking about, just gonna, they're starting the loser bracket, backs are against the wall from the get go, and they gotta show up or they're heading home.
Yep, definitely. Let's move on to the eighth seed, which is the Seattle Surge. Because of that tiebreaker, like I said, Seattle and Florida, they start in the winners bracket of this tournament. Seattle, they're coming in with a 2-3 record and a 9-12 map count. I mean, they were a team that looked really, really good to begin the season and in the preseason. They obviously haven't looked as good heading into the second major. Their losses this stage were against Boston, who is a very competent team. They lost to OpTic, which is everybody loses to OpTic at the moment, and they also lost to LAG, which was a surprising, not a surprising result per se, maybe to some, but both those teams are kind of like middle of the pack, so anything could happen there. They beat FaZe, which is pretty incredible. They beat them 3-2 in the first week of this set of qualifying matches, and they finished off with a win over the LA Thieves. So what do you think of Seattle? We've talked about them a lot on this podcast. You've been pretty high on this team and how much potential they have, especially how much potential they showed they could have at the beginning of the season. So where do you sit now with the Seattle Surge?
I still think they have a lot of potential. Um, they just, this is the second major in a row where they're going to go up against OpTic in the first round. And obviously last time at Major 1, they lost that match to OpTic, and then they dropped down and they played Paris, and that's when Paris had their, you know, their first win of the season, and crowd was going wild, and full team interview on stage and all that jazz. And despite my, you know, high hopes, I don't know if high hopes is the right word, but despite the potential I think Seattle has, this is another scenario here where I think the same exact thing could happen where they lose to OpTic in the first round of the winners bracket. They drop down and play the Rocker against their home crowd, and they lose to the Rocker, and they come in last place again. So it's definitely they've had an up and down season. Heading in, team they were getting hyped up a lot, performed well at the Kickoff Classic, and then it's been a pretty inconsistent couple of weeks and months for them since then. So um, they're in a tough spot in this major just based on their draw. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do come in for a tied for last place finish, but at the same time, they do have the potential. Like you were just saying, they pulled off the upset against FaZe. They have that upset potential against OpTic. I don't think it's incredibly likely, but it's there, and they could do it. And if they do, it would definitely shake things up. Um, but yeah, end of the day, I just think, as I've talked about multiple times with Seattle now, I don't, even if they get double, lose their first, lose in the winners bracket and then lose in the losers bracket to get that last place finish. I don't know if I see them making a roster change regardless of that, just because they have that young core. They want to see them to build around, and I don't again necessarily think that's an answer, but you never know. I think it's also just we're gonna have to see what Atlanta or not Atlanta, what Seattle shows up to each of their matches, regardless of when they're playing or who they're playing. They have that upset potential, and they also have the potential coming last. So very up and down season, back and forth, inconsistencies, and it's just gonna come down to all that.
Well, you want to talk about inconsistent teams? Do I have a team for you? The Florida Mutineers coming in seventh place. They started these set of qualifying matches off with a 2-0 record and a 6-0 map count. They beat LAG 3-0 on the first day of qualifying matches, and they finished out the first week with a 3-0 sweep of the New York Subliners, who were kind of going through it at that point. Then they hit a very tough stretch of matches, in my opinion. They played OpTic Texas in week 2 as their only match. They got swept by OpTic. And in the final week of qualifying matches, they played the Atlanta FaZe, who they lost to 3-1. And then the next day, they faced the Boston Breach, who they were swept by. So it has been a really rough time to be a Florida Mutineers fan for the last 2 weeks. They, since starting 6-0 in map count and 2-0 in matches, they are 1-9 in map count and 0-3 in matches. Fortunately, they didn't fall out of the top 8, so they do start in the winners bracket. But things have not been good recently for them. They obviously had a very embarrassing loss to the Boston Breach in the last major. There's a potential that they, like Seattle, could do very well in this tournament, but there is a great possibility that they get knocked out with a last place finish. Where do you see Florida going into Major 2?
This was my worry. I brought it up as soon as they went 2-0. And again, it's not exactly fair to this current lineup for Florida to compare them to past lineups in the organization, just because it's different players, and there are some similar players, but they've all been different lineups. But this is just something we've seen from the Florida Mutineers organization throughout all 3 years of the CDL so far, except for when they went on that stretch in Modern Warfare where they won multiple home series events. But last year in particular, and now this year we're seeing it again. It's just that inconsistency, where 1 week we got them going 2-0, and then after that they're just losing. And I know I gave them the benefit of the doubt. I said after the 2-0 week, they played OpTic in their only match of the second week of these qualifiers, and I was like, I'm not gonna, uh, you know, just because if they lose to OpTic, I'm not gonna say, oh, here we go again. They're going up and down, up and down. But now that it's 3 losses in a row and in a 2-0 week here in this last week heading into the major, it kind of, just it shows that this is just a thing that's happened with Florida. We've seen it multiple times from the organization. Again, this was a team that had the roster construction and everything was questioned even before the season started, because it's just, they brought in Dave Patty as a main AR when they already had Skies and Awakening, who were both traditionally AR players. And we've seen moments where both Awakening and Skies have looked good on a sub this year. But this is one where if Florida were to make a roster change, I wouldn't be surprised, just because it was already a lineup that was questioned by multiple people in the past. But yeah, this is just again, I guess par for the course for the Florida organization, just in terms of that roller coaster style seasons and performances they've had throughout the CDL's history. But like you said, that it could be worse. They could have gone 0-3 after starting 0-2 and not made the winners bracket.
Mm-hmm.
They have at least guaranteed themselves the shot to play 2 matches on land, which is already double what they played last major when they only got to play Boston. They had that series where Awakening dropped like 34 and whatever it was for the loss, and the weird series against them. They're not going to be one and done this major. They could be two and done. I don't really know. But yeah, this is, you said it the best. This is an inconsistent team, and it's really gonna come down to what they're able to show us here at the major on land. Tough matchup against London in the first round, but it is one I feel like, just based on the rosters, like we've seen Zero and Gizmo both like to use the automaton, which could mean we see more of those like AR favored maps, which could help Florida. I don't know, but then we also, Florida, we've talked about them being good on Bokage, which obviously isn't an AR map. So I don't really know. It's a weird one. I feel like I've been saying that for all these teams, but um yeah, just especially after that 2-0 start to this set of qualifiers is definitely, their recent performance has to be disappointing for the camp, and they're going to have to try to turn things around right away.
The sixth seed in this major is the Los Angeles Guerrillas, who went 3-2 in their qualifying matches with a 9-9 map count. It should be noted, though, that their final loss this past week was a 3-0 sweep to OpTic Texas, but Gunless did not play in that match. Spart filled in for him. At the time, the Guerrillas said that Gunless was under the weather and that he would be unable to play. The Guerrillas have since announced that Gunless will miss the entire second major and that Spart will be subbing in for this tournament. Gunless, he explained the reason why he will not be playing more on Twitter. He said that he has been dealing with erosive duodenitis, stomach ulcers, small intestine ulcers, and that some of the medications that he has been taking have been causing some very severe side effects, which have been causing like nausea and like insomnia and not being able to eat. So some very, very severe side effects from the medications that he's been taking has kind of forced him out of this major, and Spart is going to continue to fill in for the time being. So first of all, we wish Gunless the best on his road to recovery, and we hope that he's back soon. For this team, it is a tough road, obviously, to not have one of your, one of the four players on your roster and somebody that they seem to be building a little momentum with. They were actually 3-1 in this stage before Spart had to fill in for that OpTic match. And while I don't think that it was likely that they would have beaten OpTic in that last match, there was always the possibility. And they lost that 3-0 to Florida in the first week, and then they swept Paris. They beat Seattle, and then they beat LAT for their 3 wins. This is an interesting team. I'm not really sure what the ceiling is, and I'm not really sure what the floor is with them. They're like many of these middle of the road teams, as you could imagine, are very up and down, and they're jerking around their fans a little too much with their performances. But what do you think of LAG going into this major?
I have very low expectations for them, and
Yeah.
it's not, necessarily anyone's fault. I mean, first off, like you said, wish Gunless a speedy recovery and hope everything goes well for him. But just the circumstances the team are put in right now, they're gonna have minimal practice with Spart. I think Spart's a good challengers player, and um, but I don't think him replacing Gunless, who's just like a superstar slayer. I don't see that being something where the Gorillas are able to make a run, especially like I just said with limited practice with Spart to begin with. So this, unfortunately, just due to the circumstances, I'm not like setting the bar high for them at all. Like you said, they're going to be facing Boston, who's looked really strong lately. And then they drop down. If they lose that match against Boston, they would drop down and play Toronto, which that would be an interesting match because if Toronto loses to LAG with a sub, um, that might be your sign there to, time to make a change or figure something out. But at the same time, if, LAG loses to Boston and then loses to Toronto, I wouldn't be entirely surprised just because of the circumstances involved in this situation with Spart being a last minute fill in.
The fifth seed is a surprising fifth seed, the Atlanta FaZe, who went 3-2 in their matches and 11-10 in map count. They finished off this stage of qualifying matches with a 3-1 win over Florida on Friday, and then a 3-0 loss to OpTic on Sunday. But similarly to LAG, Atlanta was forced to play with a sub. Prestini, he subbed in for Simp, who he said on Twitter that he had been throwing up the morning of the match and that he couldn't actually even make it through the warm-up map. So Prestini, who admitted that he had not been playing COD very much recently, I think he said he hadn't played COD in like a month or something because he didn't have a controller in Atlanta, something like that. He was forced to fill in for FaZe, which had he filled in for for Celium, I think this would have been E United reunion minus Clayster, but I don't really know what to make of Atlanta. We didn't really get to see if they had improved against OpTic because that was the most recent grand finals, and they the OpTic has been the best team in the game essentially since the first major, and Atlanta seemed to kind of righted the ship since their loss to OpTic, and then that kind of upset loss to Seattle to begin this set of qualifying matches. But what are your thoughts on Atlanta? Because this is a team that we refused to pick against for a long time, and since they've started losing, I picked against them like 3 times. So what do you think of FaZe right now?
I just want to say, for the record, I got kind of screwed by the Simp
Yeah,
situation. In
you
more
did.
seriousness, I hope, you know, just like Gunless, I hope Simp feels better and gets well
Same.
soon. It doesn't, seem like his situation is as serious as Gunless, and I think, I haven't heard anything that suggests he won't play at the major, unlike Gunless, which is obviously good.
He
So,
went to Minnesota, so that's good.
yeah.
Like, so yeah.
Um, so regardless, I think that's just like, an unfortunate situation. It would have been great to see full strength Atlanta going up against OpTic to end these qualifiers. Could have been, a little bit of a test to see really, if they learned anything from their matchups at the first major and anything like that. Um, the good thing, just based on the seeding though, is if we expect FaZe to beat Subliners and OpTic to beat Seattle, we have the potential to once again see OpTic versus FaZe in the winners bracket semifinals of the major, which obviously we saw at the last major. OpTic won. FaZe goes on the losers bracket run to get back to the grand finals, and then we see the showdown again there between those two teams. Um, which could very well be something that happens here again, regardless of, if those two teams win, whoever wins that round two matchup, it could be something again where that loser just goes back on a loser bracket run to, get back into the grand finals against potentially that team who wins that matchup. But yeah, I will say too, Prestini definitely surprised me, especially with like for all the jokes and stuff on Twitter about him not playing much. He definitely performed better um, than I would have expected for someone who hasn't played in so long, going up against the best team in the game. Like, definitely not an ideal situation, but he is a world champ for a reason. So, that was just due to the circumstances. Again, with Simp not playing, it was more of like a fun match to watch, just because you got to see Pristini back in action. He's playing with his twin brother again, all that stuff, and you really couldn't take like too much away from the result just because of that. It's not FaZe at full strength. But regardless, it is strange to see them be in this fifth seed spot. But I think just based on how the bracket works out, it could lead to, again, that rematch against OpTic, which would be hopefully, all things considered, would be both teams at full strength. And that should be a good match if it happens.
The fourth seed in this tournament are the New York Subliners. They have completely turned around since Paul X joined the roster. They are actually 3-0 in their matches and 9-3 in map count since Paul X replaced Clayster in the starting lineup. That being said, they have played some underperforming teams in their 3-match win streak. They beat Paris, Minnesota, and Toronto. All three of those teams are in the bottom 4 in this major, and they'll all start in the losers bracket. But I think it should be noted, especially that Paul has only been a part of this roster for 3 matches, and in those 3 matches, they are 6-0 in hardpoint. They were literally the worst hardpoint team in the entire league before Paul X's arrival, and they are undefeated in that game mode since. So it is an interesting thing to consider that even, Toronto's obviously horrible at hardpoint, and Minnesota is, not great either. So, like, I don't think that it's as big of a deal, but, it's they might have lost all of those hard points to those teams before they made this roster change, because that's how bad they were. I think there's either way, I think Paul X deserves a lot of credit, and this roster deserves a lot of credit for even salvaging a 4th place finish, like in the qualifying matches to go in to this major, because they were really on the road to being 0-5 or 1-4 or whatever, heading into this major. So, what do you think of New York? Are there hard point woes behind them, or is it just kind of like the set of circumstances of playing some of these weaker hardpoint teams?
I think that's important to bring up, is just despite this turnaround in hardpoint, it is worth noting who they were beating in hardpoint, and they have a test right away in Atlanta phase to start the major. So if New York's able to come out and take 2 hardpoints against phase, then maybe okay, damn, then they really flipped the switch here. But that's going to be a tough test for them right away. I think it is worth mentioning just to see them be the 4th seed. Like, I didn't even know technically they were the 4th seed until you put this in the notes here. So that's kind of surprising to me. But yeah, I mean, it's just it's and regardless of who they've been playing against and beating recently, it's still worth mentioning that this is a turnaround, with Paul replacing a player as legendary as Clay. And Neptune has seemed to be performing better individually as well. So I think this New York team has potential, but they certainly have a tough opening round matchup that I personally am not expecting them to win. Who would they? And then they would drop down, as we touched on earlier, if they lose that match too. Atlanta, they would play against the Thieves, and although the Thieves have been struggling, that's still, like, on paper, potentially the toughest matchup in the lower bracket for dropping down there. I don't really know. That's weird to say, just because the Thieves did go 0-5. But regardless, I think, like you said, we'll get to see immediately at the major, just how much of an impact this roster change has had for New York, and we'll get to see how they stack up against, in my eyes, still one of the best teams in the game in phase.
Atlanta, whether they're one of the best teams in the game, they're definitely one of the best hardpoint teams in the league right now. They're like 21-9, I think, in hardpoint this season, and the Thieves are, obviously slumping right now, but they're also one of the better hardpoint teams, like, throughout the entire season based on their map record. So those matchups don't really work out for the Subliners. Like, their weakest game mode is, regardless of the results, is still probably hardpoint. And to play Atlanta and possibly play the Thieves if they can't get past phase, those aren't great matchups for New York, and it'll be a tough road for them. But that's what happens when there's only 12 teams. You usually play the best of the best. Let's move on. We have 3 more teams to go. The third seed is the Boston Breach. They went 4-1. They were actually undefeated heading into the final week of the qualifying matches. They were able to beat Florida. They swept the Mutineers on Saturday, but they dropped their final match of the qualifying set. They lost to London 3-1 on Sunday for a 4-1 record, a 13-6 map count, which is the second best map count in this set of qualifying matches. I've really kind of I did pick against Boston in that Florida match, which was, I knew it was kind of stupid when I did it, but they made me look even more stupid by the sweep. What do you think of Boston? I think that they're a really, really good team, and they're possibly the most surprising team this year for me.
Oh yeah, sure, for sure. We've touched on it multiple times here, just how impressive it is for that team to come in so late and have not as much of a player pool to pick from to form their roster. All that stuff we've touched on that multiple times now, so I'm not going to go too in depth on it. But yeah, this has been really impressive from them. I think the only logical explanation is the alley cat buff for Zinni. But in more seriousness, I do think it's worth mentioning, like you said, that some of the teams they've beaten in this stretch haven't, technically been the best teams. It's not like, they beat OpTic and FaZe and stuff. So it will be interesting to see how they're able to translate this online success to the major. But luckily for them, at least in my eyes, they have a very favorable first round matchup. I believe last major, their first round matchup was against FaZe. In this
Yes.
major, they're going up against LAG with Spart as a substitute. So um, I think if I'm a competitor, I think I know which matchup I'm going to be picking between those two to kick off a tournament. So I think they're in a good spot here. And especially based on the bracket, with FaZe and OpTic both above them in the other, it's not a quadrant, the other half of the winners bracket. If Boston gets past LAG, they don't have to go up against OpTic or FaZe for potentially that winner's final spot. It would most likely be London, which would be interesting just because we did most recently see them lose to London in the online matches this past weekend. So, yeah, I just think it's been a pretty cool storyline to see how well they've been performing recently. And I'm looking to see if they're able to continue it on LAN, especially with this, the first round matchup with LAG in the last minute sub. If they were to drop that opening matchup in the winners bracket, I would be very surprised, and I would I don't really even know what I would be very surprised, and there would definitely be a major upset. So I think they have to capitalize on the circumstances there, um, and not let there be any room for doubt that they are actually capable of producing the results that they've been showing recently.
The second seed in this tournament is the London Royal Ravens. They went 4-1 with a 13-7 map count. Like we just said, they beat Boston on Sunday 3-1 to finish off this set of qualifying matches. I think London is definitely a top 3 team, and depending on what phase shows up, they could be the second best team in this entire league so far. They've been able to beat some of these top teams. Consistently, actually, and even when they had Paul X come in for those 2 matches to start off the set of qualifying, they really didn't miss a beat. They did lose that one match, but really, I think that they've looked otherwise pretty consistent, despite like a few hiccups with like Paris Legion and stuff, like almost losing to them. But I think that overall, this is a very solid team, and definitely not a team that we should have been picking against consistently in the beginning of the year. Yeah, London, they come in with the second seed. Do you think that they pose a legitimate threat to OpTic? Because OpTic is definitely the best team heading in, but do you think that the Royal Ravens are a threat?
I mean, if I was to pick just one team to be like the biggest threat to OpTic, I would have to go with FaZe. But I think London definitely has the potential. Similar to what I was just talking about with Boston, based on the way the bracket shakes up, they don't have to worry about playing OpTic till potentially the winners final. If they stay up there in the winners bracket, that is the winners bracket final we saw at Major One. I think OpTic won 3-1, if I remember correctly. I think London won the first hard point, and then OpTic won the next three.
Yeah.
And then obviously, London didn't get back up to the grand finals for a rematch, so I'm pretty sure that's the last time we saw the two teams square off. But regardless, I just think, I've been betting against London way too much. But they certainly have that, that they could upset OpTic. I don't necessarily think it's super likely if we were to see that showdown. Um, but again, I've been betting against them all year and been wrong. So even me just saying that now could be, the kick in the ass that, um, you know, they proved me wrong once again. Uh, yeah, they everyone's been playing well on that team. Zero's really had a strong bounce back since, his whole unfortunate situation last year where he wasn't really able to play. Gizmo and Nasty have both, really shined as a rookie. And Afro, really his first full season in the league since he came in so late last year in Cold War. He's turned heads as well with strong SMG play. So this team is really strong, and I think um, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see them back in the winners bracket final just based on how things shake up here at the major.
In the number one seed, the OpTic Texas, 5-0 in the matches, 15-3 in map count. They actually were 6-0 in map count this final weekend. They beat the Los Angeles Guerrillas on Saturday 3-0, and then they beat Atlanta FaZe 3-0 on Sunday. It should be noted that both of those teams that they faced actually had to have a substitute in, which denied us from potentially good to great matches, especially with FaZe. Seeing a full FaZe roster versus a full OpTic roster would have been nice, but I think it's pretty likely that we'll see them again at the major. If both of those teams win their first round matchups, we will see it in the winners bracket semifinal, and there's also the possibility that they do it again in the grand finals like they did in the first major. I think it's clear that OpTic is the best team. I think they've won you put it in the notes, 12 series in a row now, I believe. So 12 match win streak. I don't know what the win streak record is, but they're getting close. I can assure you. I think that FaZe had the record, last season or something. But 12 straight wins, and some of them, like the grand finals win, have come against FaZe. They really are the best team, and they've proved it time and time again. So you think that FaZe are the only threat, or I guess not? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the biggest threat to
Biggest threat.
OpTic. If FaZe and OpTic play again, who do you give the advantage to there?
I mean, OpTic very clearly, like you said, is the best team in the game, and it would be if I was betting for whatever reason on the matches, or being very serious with the predictions, I would, it would be dumb in my opinion to go against OpTic there. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but for my sake of predictions, I picked FaZe to beat OpTic in this last showdown in the online match before the Simp news broke. So I'd probably go with FaZe again, just because I have a lot of faith in that FaZe roster, and especially the coaching staff to try to figure out any small advantage they might be able to have on that OpTic team. But regardless of that, it's just OpTic are very clearly the best team in the game. Like you said, 12 match win streak, I believe, a 14 game win streak in control, which is pretty impressive too. Um, Especially just since it's not obviously the most important mode because it's only played once, but it is that swing mode.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of series, and you're able to extend a series just automatic. Even if they were to go down 0-2 for whatever reason, if they're playing really well in control, they don't have to necessarily worry about getting 3-0 swept or something. They would most likely be able to extend a series just due to them succeeding so much in that swing mode there in the middle of the series. So Um, yeah, I think end of the day we can't take much away from their recent matches. This just past week, just based on the circumstances of playing two teams with subs. It's just in my eyes, I think obvious they're the best team, number one, top dog, but they have that target on their back. Everyone's gunning for them. Everyone wants to be the team to try and take them down. It's just going to come down to OpTic, not getting complacent, and I don't think that'll be the case just because they have so many hungry players. Um, but that I think they themselves are their own biggest enemy if for whatever reason they were to get complacent or anything like that. Um, but I don't think that's the case, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see them hoisting that pretty sick Minnesota Rocker trophy at the end of this weekend.
Yeah, so that does it for the team previews, but I do want to get your thoughts on who you think will win this tournament and who you think they will beat in the grand finals.
I mean, I'm not gonna pick OpTic just because that would be boring if we both pick OpTic, even though said it'd be boring. We both picked FaZe in the past, and we've done that either way. So I'm gonna go with FaZe. Not really an underdog story, but it's just a different answer. So um, I expect FaZe to try to be, try to reclaim their status as the top dogs, and I feel like they're gonna want to come out and prove some doubters wrong if there are actually doubters in FaZe due to a second place finish. Um, but yeah, so for the sake of not just picking OpTic, I'll go with FaZe. But again, like I just said a couple minutes ago, would not be surprised at all if OpTic I think it's 4 series, so they would, yeah. If we see OpTic is on a 16 match win streak on Sunday, I would not be surprised at all.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either, to be honest. If FaZe or OpTic win this, I think OpTic will win. They haven't really given me any reason to pick against them. But I do think that FaZe will get to the grand finals. They seem to, I think that London has actually, I think, been a little more, maybe not more consistent, but like London in the regular season matches or in the qualifying matches seem to be doing just a tad bit better than FaZe recently. But when they've gone up against each other, it seems like FaZe kind of has London's number, and I don't think that can be overlooked. In this kind of format where you have a double elimination bracket, and there's the possibility that these teams could play twice, because if both of them get to the winners bracket final and then the losers bracket, or in the grand finals or something. So I think that FaZe kind of has London's number, but OpTic seems to have literally everybody's number right now. So I don't think that I can really pick against them at this moment. Do you have a dark horse, like somebody, a team that like for me, I think a dark horse is probably Boston because they have, like you mentioned, an easier path to the winners bracket finals because the Gorillas are playing without Gunless, and maybe if London gets tripped up against Florida, then they would play the Mutineers. Or even if they play London, I'd rather play London than play FaZe or OpTic. So I do think that they have a shot. I don't think it's a great shot, but I would pick Boston as kind of like my dark horse, or a team that is not like a legitimate contender to beat OpTic.
No, when you just asked that before you said Boston, that was the first name that jumped in my head. Um, Again, similar to like you said when I was bringing up just their bracket and the shakedown of the first round matchups and stuff, it makes sense. Um, but to give like a super mega ultra dark horse, I feel like I gotta go with Minnesota. The home crowd, hometown favorite. Um, we've seen the home team win 100% of the CDL LAN tournaments during Vanguard, so Minnesota could continue that trend here at this event and be a super dark horse.
Yeah, I mean the LA Thieves are probably the super dark horse right now. Like, I mean they're probably so dark like you can't even see them kind of thing because I do think that there is a possibility that they get there because New York is not a great hardpoint team. They could beat New York. They're gonna they would then play the loser of Seattle or the winner of Seattle, Minnesota. Neither of those teams are too strong, and then it comes down to like whoever comes down from the winners bracket after that. But I think that the Thieves could end up actually placing pretty well, depending on if they just can turn things around or if LAN is a much different experience for them as a team than online has. But I wouldn't count on it. But if you're a betting person, I do think that their odds are probably not looking too good, and they have a better chance of getting like a top 4 finish than a lot of these other loser bracket teams. So just putting that out there. But I wouldn't
I,
bet on
I,
them.
I think, in all fairness, if there, despite the Thieves being 05, like if I was just like looking at Vegas odds or something, I feel like Paris would still be at the bottom, just kind of like,
Yeah.
giving some credit to past results for the Thieves and Ultra. Um, but regardless, yeah, I think I was expecting Thieves to try to turn things around this past week, so I am not uh, gonna have huge expectations for them in the major after they weren't able to do it most recently. But who knows? I've been wrong plenty already this season, and I just think end of the day we are in for a super entertaining weekend of Call of Duty action.
We certainly are. We have so many matches to talk about next week for sure. Maybe a cool storyline where the Paris Legion have finally won their first major in the Call of Duty League. You can't count them out. That's why they play the games. Maybe that'll happen, but most likely we'll be talking about OpTic or FaZe hoisting another trophy. And I did show it a few minutes ago, but it is a really cool trophy, and I'm glad that Minnesota, they seem to be doing a great job of putting together this event. I'm sure there will be technical difficulties or something to to really make it like a less than perfect experience for everybody, but I hope not. But I should also mention that the Challengers Open is this weekend. It's like the first Challengers LAN event, like a big one, in like 2 years, basically since the pandemic started. Challengers has been completely online, and now there is an actual Challengers event that is coinciding with this second major in Minnesota. So I think that's going to be broadcast on the CDL Challengers Twitch or YouTube. I'm not sure where exactly, but it should be interesting to watch considering there are a lot of well-known players and teams competing. Minnesota and Toronto, they both have their academy team, or I think they have a few academy teams. Toronto does, but they're competing, and then you got Havoc and Texas Nation, and maybe he'll win another tournament. They're the best NA team. I believe Renegades from APAC region is also attending. So a lot of good challengers teams and possibly future CDL players will be competing in this Challengers Open. I believe $75,000 is on the line and some challengers points. So good luck to everybody competing. I think that about does it. If you have anything else, just one thing about our prediction scores. We both did really poorly last week because things were not doing too hot. Like our teams were kind of just throwing a little bit. I went 4-6. You went 3-7. So you now have a 2-game lead on me. You're 45-33, and I am 43-35 overall this season. We will be posting our predictions every day of the tournament, so you can tune in to at Ego Chall Podcast on Twitter for our predictions. So keep up to date with that. That about does it for me.
Yeah, I don't really have much. That was a lackluster week prediction wise for us. Were some situations obviously hard to predict that Simp isn't going to play, and Gumless not playing. But regardless, I am definitely excited for this weekend of action. Like you said, Challengers event. It's a great opportunity, especially just because we haven't seen these teams on LAN since the pandemic, really. It's a great opportunity for the amateur players to showcase what they're able to do, especially on the LAN environment, and especially as we were just talking about with so many of these teams struggling in the league, and us being, me in particular, being uncertain of what teams could do, roster change wise, this is a great opportunity for some of these challengers players to come out and kind of assert themselves and show what they're capable of. So I'm looking forward to that, and obviously I'm looking forward to the main event. Like you said, I think just based on what we've seen recently, I would be surprised if, OpTic isn't the team hoisting the trophy at the end. But like you said, that's why they play the matches out. Anything can happen, especially in a game like Vanguard. Who knows what's going to happen on each day? So I'm looking forward to the matches this weekend. Hope you guys um, enjoyed the show today, and I hope you guys will tune in to the action in the tournament as well as our recap for it in the following week. And yeah, as always, thank you guys for watching, and remember to send the chow.